Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Salahuddin al-Ayubi, Volume 2, The Establishment of the Ayubid State. Start of Part 2 of Chapter 4. Al-Hafidh as-Salafi. His full name was al-Hafiz Abu at-Tahir Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Muhammad as-Salafi al-Isfahani. He was one of the Eastern scholars who migrated to Egypt and settled in Alexandria, through whom Allah brought much benefit in spreading the madhab of Ahl Sunnah. In Alexandria, as-Salafi moved to Alexandria in 511 Hijri, at the age of 36, having accumulated a great deal of experience, acquired abundant knowledge, and reached a level of specialized intellectual maturity in the field of hadith, in which he had reached the level of a specialist scholar. He had traveled to many lands, and had had the opportunity to meet many scholars and senior scholars of hadith, from whom he learned narration, the foundations of hadith, and hadith terminology. He narrated many good quotations and useful words from their books, and copied many volumes with his own hand. He was also an experienced writer, who had already written a biography of his sheikh in Isfahan, and another of his sheikh in Baghdad. He had previous knowledge of hadith and teaching, of which he gained practical experience at the beginning of 492 Hijri, in his hometown of Isfahan, and also during his stay in Damascus, where he worked in teaching from 509 Hijri to 511 Hijri. When as-Salafi arrived in Egypt, his education was not limited only to hadith. He was also a faqih of the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i. He studied fiqh in the Nizamiya College of Baghdad under Sheikh al-Qiya al-Harasi, Fakhr al-Islam al-Shashi, and Yusuf ibn Ali Zanjani. As-Salafi was also well versed in the different recitations of the Quran, which he had studied under the famous scholars of recitation of his time. Al-Zahabi said, I quoted from Al-Hafiz Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi what the Sheikh said about as-Salafi, and that he learnt the recitation of Asim from Abu Sa'ad al-Mutarraz. He studied the recitation of Hamzah and al-Kisai from Muhammad ibn Abi Nasr al-Qasar. He studied the recitation of Qanun from Nasr ibn Muhammad al-Shirazi. He studied the recitation of Qunbul from Abdullah ibn Ahmad al-Khurraqi. He studied with some of them in 491 Hijri. In addition to as-Salafi's deep knowledge of hadith, fiqh and recitations before he came to Alexandria, he also had a good grasp of literature and the Arabic language. He had studied all of that in Baghdad under the famous linguist Abu Zakaria Yahya ibn Ali at-Tabrizi, the Sheikh of Literature in Nizamiya College. He was also a poet who enjoyed and appreciated poetry. He loved to listen to it, and he ended every gathering in which he taught students of hadith in salamas with a few lines of poetry offering wisdom and advice. As-Salafi loved Alexandria and its people, and they honored him. He thought it was a suitable place to live, because he could benefit himself and others there, so he temporarily gave up his intention of leaving it for Andalusia, and decided to adopt it as his place of residence, even if it was only for a short while. This decision of his was in fact due to a number of reasons, in addition to the love and honor that the people of Alexandria showed him, among which were the following. The geographical location of Alexandria, in the middle of the Muslim world, in particular between the Hijaz in the east and the Maghrib and Andalusia in the west, which made it like a meeting point for Andalusian and Maghribi pilgrims, who used to rest there for a few days and take a break from the hardships of travel when they were heading to the Hijaz to perform Hajj, and on their way back from the Hijaz to their own land. They made the most of their break in Alexandria for their scholars and men of letters to meet the local scholars and men of letters. So they would listen to one another and exchange various types of knowledge and benefit from one another. At the beginning of the 6th century Hijri, Alexandria was a meeting point for many Syrian scholars whose country had become the battleground of the Crusades. Some of its cities had fallen into the hands of the Crusaders, such as Jerusalem, Ramlah, and many cities on the coast of Palestine, which had forced those scholars to migrate from there. A large number of Muslim scholars from Sicily had moved to Alexandria after the Normans occupied their island in the second half of the 5th century Hijri. A number of Andalusian scholars had also moved there in the wake of ongoing political upheavals that were affecting some of the cities of Andalusia. This had motivated many scholars to migrate and seek safety elsewhere, as in the case of the famous Maliki faqih Abu Bakr at-Tartushi and others. The people of Alexandria enjoyed freedom of religious belief compared to the people of Cairo, despite the fact that they were officially under the authority of the Shiite Fatimid Caliphate. They were Sunnis of the madhab of Imam Malik. This relative freedom made those who came to Egypt head towards Alexandria instead of Cairo, to settle there far from the pressures of the Shiite Fatimid madhab, which contradicted their Sunni beliefs. These reasons and others initially encouraged al-Hafidh as-Salafi to settle in Alexandria, and he soon put down roots in the city and grew to old age there. Finally, he got married, when he was nearly 60 years old, to Sit al-Ahl of Alexandria. Thus his load grew heavier, and he finally gave up the idea of moving on altogether when the governor of Alexandria, al-Adil ibn as-Salar, built a school for him, al-Madrasah al Adiliyah, and appointed him to supervise it and teach in it. So he settled down and had a good life there. He did not leave the city that he loved, and eventually he died there. His academic activities and his school. Al-Hafiz as-Salafi started to teach Hadith when he first arrived in Alexandria in 511 Hijri. When the scholar of Hadith of Alexandria at the time, Sheikh Abu Abdullah al-Razi, who was known as Ibn al-Khattab, died in 525 Hijri, as-Salafi took his place and thus became the Sheikh of Alexandria and its sole, undisputed scholar of Hadith. Then his fame and reputation increased day after day, and the Andalusian pilgrims began to tell people about him everywhere they went. Students of Hadith in Egypt and elsewhere heard about him and traveled to meet him. They came to Alexandria from all parts of the world to meet its great scholar of Hadith and prominent Quran reciter. Thus the study and narration of Hadith became very active, and Alexandria attained a prominent position in this field of study. It was said that Alexandria had been like the rest of Egypt. The study of Hadith was little practiced until as-Salafi came to live there, at which point people started traveling to that city to learn Hadith and Quran recitations. Al-Madrasah al Adiliyah as-Salafiyah. As-Salafi continued to give lessons, sometimes in the mosque and sometimes in his house, for about a quarter of a century, until Abul Hasan Ali ibn as-Salar, who was known as al-Malik al-Adil, was appointed as governor of the city. He showed a great deal of interest in him and honored him more, and built for him a school which was called al-Madrasah al Adiliyah, after its founder al-Adil. Then after that, it became known as al-Madrasah as-Salafiyah, after its teacher as-Salafi. In his book, Alexandria, Dr. Jamaluddin Ash-Shayal states that it was founded in 544 Hijri. Dr. Hassan Abdul Hamid Saleh states that the school was built in 544 Hijri. The historical sources indicate that Ibn as-Salar was a Sunni of Kurdish origin, and that he openly showed his Sunni allegiance when he was the governor of Alexandria. Then he began to correspond with Nur ad-Din Mahmud, the ruler of Aleppo, seeking his support against the Fatimid authorities. A strong friendship developed between them, and he sent reinforcements because Ibn as-Salar was a Sunni like him, and also because Nuruddin wanted to conquer Egypt. Nuruddin Mahmud may have suggested to Ibn Salar in their correspondence that he should implement the same plan as was implemented in Syria to undermine the Shiite Fatimid madhab and put an end to it by building schools. So Ibn as-Salar built this school and put al-Hafiz as-Salafi, the Sunni scholar of Hadith of Alexandria, in charge of running it and teaching in it. Naturally, all this happened during Ibn as-Salar's governorship in Alexandria, and before he was appointed as Wazir on the 15th of Shaban, 544 Hijri. The Fatimid Caliph at-Tahir was afraid and realized the danger posed by Ibn as-Salar and the impact that a Sunni school might have by attracting the Sunnis around it. So he was worried and began to plot against him. He appointed as Wazir the Shiite Najmuddin ibn Masal, who was of Maghribi descent. That angered Ibn as-Salar, who was a Sunni, so he gathered his supporters among the Sunni people of Alexandria and marched with them to Cairo, which he entered after the defeat of Ibn Masal at Al Jazeera on the 14th of Ramadan, 544 Hijri. We may not be exaggerating if we say that the real reason for the conflict between Ibn as-Salar and Ibn Masal was the conflict between the beliefs of Ahl Sunnah, which was supported by Nuruddin Mahmud, and the Shiite Fatimid madhab, which was represented by the Fatimid Caliph. The people of Alexandria rejoiced greatly at the founding of this school, and regarded it as a great gift from their governor Ibn as-Salar, for which it was their duty to thank him. So their poets began to praise him and express the joy they felt in their hearts. Al-Hafid as-Salafi, being in charge of this school, made it into a beacon to bring the Egyptian people back to the beliefs of Ahl Sunnah, as well as a meeting place for intellectuals, scholars and students of Hadith, jurisprudents of Fiqh, and of the Quran, men of letters, poets, historians, and storytellers used to meet there. It grew and flourished, and a lot of people came to the school and were influenced by the lessons they received there and the meetings, seminars, and lectures that were held. Its influence on the people of Alexandria in particular was manifested in two instances. The day they set out with their governor Ibn Salah to regain the wazirship in Cairo, and the day they fought alongside Salahaddin, supporting him against the Fatimid Wazir Shawar and his crusader allies. They did not let him down or forsake him, despite the harsh siege that was imposed on them for 3 months. They fought side by side with him, and put all that they possessed in terms of strength, wealth, and men at his disposal, until Shawar and the crusaders lifted the siege. Salahaddin al-Ayubi never forgot those good deeds of the people of Alexandria. When he toppled the Fatimid state and established the Ayubid state on its ruins, he paid special attention to Alexandria and took great care of it, because of the importance of its strategic location in defending Egypt, and because of the high esteem in which he held the people of Alexandria due to their support for him in their heroic stance when Shawar besieged their city in 562 Hijri. They had defended him, giving him all they had of men, wealth and weapons. Hence it comes as no surprise to see Salahaddin issuing orders, from the time he first became Sultan of Egypt, that the walls of Alexandria were to be repaired, its watchtowers and citadels were to be fortified, and new structures were to be built in the city. Not only that, he also travelled to Alexandria himself in 572 Hijri, to see it for himself and organize its affairs, and he specifically ordered that its walls and watchtowers be repaired. During this visit, Salahaddin checked on their war fleet and saw the destruction and losses that had affected it. So he ordered that it be repaired and that new ships be built and added to it, allocating a special budget for that and setting up a special department for it, for which he appointed an admiral of the fleet. Alexandria remained the focus of Salahaddin's attention and care. He ordered that new buildings be constructed and he checked on it and followed news of it until he had another opportunity to visit it in 577 Hijri, when he went there and checked for himself what repairs had been made and inspected the new buildings that he had ordered built, and he ordered that they be completed quickly. Al-Imad al-Isfahani said, describing this visit: After Ramadan 577 Hijri, the Sultan went to Alexandria via al-Buhaira and camped at as-Sawari, and he saw the walls that had been rebuilt and the buildings he had ordered to be built, and he issued orders that they be completed. During this visit, Salahaddin issued instructions that many new buildings and public facilities be built in Alexandria. He ordered that a large school be built for foreign students, in which they could learn all branches of knowledge and literature. He also built a house for them to stay in, bathhouses where they could bathe, and a hospital where they could receive medical treatment for free, supervised by full-time doctors. Many schools were built in rapid succession in Alexandria during Salahaddin's era, in accordance with his general policy of establishing large numbers of schools as an intellectual means of eradicating Fatimid Shiite thought. The number of schools increased in a few years, which attracted the attention of the historians who visited Alexandria and wrote about it. Ibn Khuzaymah, who visited Alexandria in 561 Hijri, that is 1164 Common Era, and stayed there, described it as follows. In Alexandria there are 180 schools for the pursuit of knowledge. During this second visit, Salahaddin ordered that his grand mosque be built, and he moved the Friday khutbah there, after it had been given during the Fatimid era, in Masjid al-Atarin, the largest mosque in the city. Then he followed that by building a large number of mosques. The number of mosques during this period reached a high number, which attracted the attention of the historians who visited the city. They differed in their estimations of the number, and sometimes reached the point of exaggeration. Ibn al-Jubair, who visited Alexandria in 578 Hijri, during Salahaddin's era, described the large number of mosques in the city and said, It is the land with the greatest number of mosques, although people's estimations of the numbers differ. Some of them overestimate and some underestimate. Those who overestimate say there are as many as 12,000 mosques, and those who underestimate give figures that vary between 8,000 and other figures. In general, there are very many, and you can find 4 or 5 in one location. All of them have imams appointed by the Sultan. The Ayubid's interest in developing Alexandria continued after the death of Salahaddin, and followed the same policy until the end of the 6th century Hijri. the distinct character of al-Hafidh Abu at-Tahir as-Salafi. Serious attitude towards life. Al-Hafidh as-Salafi devoted all his life to teaching, study, writing and giving lessons, and there is no report that suggests that he ever got tired or bored of that. His entire life was serious and strict, as described by his student Al-Hafiz Abdul Qadir al-Rahawi, who said, "I have heard that during his stay in Alexandria, he did not go out to any garden or attend any event for entertainment, except on one occasion. Instead, he stayed in his school. Whenever we entered upon him, we always found him studying something. He never saw the lighthouse of Alexandria except through a small window in his house." Ibn al-Imad also described him saying, "As-Salafi lived in Alexandria for 60-odd years, focusing on the study of knowledge, reading, and collecting books." His respect for the people who sat with him. He, may Allah have mercy on him, was forbearing, humble and easygoing, and he felt at ease with people, and they felt at ease with him. He put up with bad treatment, and bore patiently the roughness of strangers. He loved those who came to visit him and showed great warmth to all. He did not spare any effort to benefit them, and show kindness and sincerity towards them. Khalil as-Safadi described him as follows: "He hardly ever showed any harshness towards anyone. If he did, he would hasten to correct it, so that no one would leave him except on the best of terms. Nevertheless, when he was giving a lesson, he would not allow anyone present, no matter how important or prominent they were, to fidget or speak to his neighbor, or to distract others from listening, until he had finished his sentence or finished the idea he was discussing. Then he would give his audience the opportunity to ask questions or comment." Al-Hafidh al-Zahabi narrated that Sultan Salahaddin and his brother attended his circle one day to listen to hadith narration, and they were speaking to one another in low voices. Their wazir turned to them and showed that he was displeased, and said, "What is this? We are reading the hadith of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you are talking?" So they fell silent and listened after that. His love of reading and collecting books. He read a great deal, and he was endued with broad knowledge. He always strove hard in the pursuit of knowledge and spent a lot of time researching issues that were unclear. Nothing distracted him when he had finished teaching except reading a book, copying out of the books of others, or writing commentaries on them. His student Al-Hafiz Abdul Qadir al-Rahawi described him as follows: "We hardly ever entered upon him but we see him reading something. He loved books very much, and was very keen to collect and own books. He had a large collection of various books, but he did not have enough time to read them all. When he died, they found that most of them had rotted and the pages had stuck to one another, because of the humidity in Alexandria, which led to many of them being ruined. And whatever money he got, he would spend it." His relationship with intellectuals. The study circles, which were held in the mosque initially, then in the schools later on, were a meeting point between him and all other groups of educated people. Through these circles he was able to establish contacts with a very large number of scholars of hadith, seekers of hadith knowledge, intellectuals and men of letters, such as writers, literati and poets, and with senior state officials such as governors, judges and others, and with craftsmen and professionals such as doctors, engineers, merchants, paper makers, bookbinders, imams of mosques, preachers, copyists and muezzins, and with many of the pilgrims from the Maghrib and Andalusia, who came to Alexandria on their way to Hajj. As for his relationship with the poets, it was good and was distinguished by kindness and compassion. He felt at ease with them and loved to meet with them and listen to them, and he recited his own poetry on occasions, as he was a poet like them. He composed poetry and he appreciated it and critiqued it. Al-Hafid al-Zahabi described him as he appreciated poetry, wrote his own, and rewarded those who praised him. His relationship with the common folk. His relationship with the common folk was very good. They held him in high esteem and used to come to him on occasion, seeking blessing from him because of his piety and righteousness. They even exaggerated in their respect for him and believed that there was blessing in him. One of the interesting stories that Al-Hafid al-Zahabi narrated in this regard is that the common folk of Alexandria would rush to him if a woman was having a difficult time giving birth, and he would write some supplications for them on a piece of paper. He would write it for them and not refuse to do so, and what he wrote was, "O Allah, they think highly of me, so do not disappoint them concerning me." His relationship with the Fatimid state. As-Salafi avoided confrontation with the Fatimid state as much as possible, so that they would not harm him as they had harmed other scholars of Alexandria, or prevent him from teaching Hadith as they had done previously with the scholar of Hadith Abu Ishaq al-Habal al-Masri. He avoided criticizing them and speaking badly of them, so as not to provoke them against him, and they kept away from him and left him alone. Some of them even used to attend his study circle and listen to him. One of the factors that helped al-Hafid al-Salafi to succeed in delivering his message was that during that period, that is 511 to 567 Hijri, the Fatimid state was in an advanced state of decline, and the caliphs themselves were weak and had no strength of will and no authority. Their affairs and their destiny were controlled by the viziers, who were engaged in a power struggle of their own. These viziers were not so keen to take care of the Fatimid madhab and protect it as they were to seek control and remain in power, and there were some Sunnis among them. Despite the differences in their madhabs, those viziers could not care less about the Fatimid madhab. As-Salafi's relationship with the Sunni governors of Alexandria, who did not follow the Fatimid madhab, was good. They respected him and loved him, acknowledged his status, attended his lessons, and studied with him. The governor Qasta al-Amiri and as-Salafi were on friendly terms and exchanged letters. In Mojam as-Safar, as-Salafi commented concerning him. This Qasta was one of the wise emirs who is inclined towards justice and persists in reading books. He was most interested in history and biographies of the earlier generations. We were on friendly terms with one another and exchanged letters. Of the deputy governor of Alexandria, Abu Rida Abdullah ibn al-Fadl ibn Dulayl al-Hadrami, as-Salafi noted in his biography, he would accompany me and discuss with me issues that were not clear in his mind. He studied Bukhari with me with the commentary of Ibn Battal, studying it in depth and not merely reading it. As for the governor of Alexandria, Al-Adil ibn Salar, he honored as-Salafi and held him in high esteem as befitted him. The governor ensured a sufficient income for him by establishing an endowment to bring al-Madrasah al Adiliyah an income and cover its expenditure and needs. These are a few examples of the relationships al-Hafid al-Salafi had with the official statesmen of the Fatimid state. As we can see, They were good relationships in which there was clearly respect, despite the fact that he did not visit any of them in their homes or places of work. His relationship with the men of the Ayubid state. Al-Hafid as-Salafi rejoiced greatly at the demise of the Shiite Fatimid state and the establishment of the Sunni Ayubid state on its ruins. From the first moment their state was established, the Ayubids began to call for a return to the beliefs of Ahl Sunnah and for the removal of all manifestations of Fatimid beliefs, and to scare all those who called for the restoration of Fatimid beliefs or the Fatimid madhab. Nevertheless, al-Hafid as-Salafi did not knock at the door of any of the Ayubid sultans or emirs to congratulate them or thank them, just as he did not knock at the door of any Fatimid rulers or emirs before them. The Ayubid sultans and emirs appreciated this behavior of as-Salafi. They went to him and attended his study circles, and they listened to him just as others did, with all respect and honor. Sultan Salahaddin, despite his lofty position and high status as ruler of all Egypt, went himself from Cairo to Alexandria, accompanied by his two sons Al-Afdal Ali and Al-Aziz Uthman, his brother Al-Adil, his secretary Al-Imad al-Isfahani, and his senior statesmen, to visit him and listen to hadiths from him. Al-Qazi ibn Shaddad said, describing this visit when speaking of the attitude of Sultan Salahuddin and his love of hearing hadiths. His Highness was very fond of listening to hadith, and when he heard of a sheikh who had great knowledge of hadith, if he was one of those who could come to him, he would ask him to come, and he would learn from him. And if that sheikh was one of those who do not knock at the door of people of authority, but stays away from their gatherings, he would go to him and learn from him. He visited al-Hafid as-Salafi in Alexandria many times and narrated many hadiths he had heard from him. Abu Shama al-Maqdisi, the author of Kitab al-Rawdatain, fi Akhbar al-Dawlatain, narrated from Al-Imad al-Isfahani a detailed description of that visit and said, Then the Sultan set out from Cairo on Wednesday, the 22nd of Shaban, taking with him his two sons Al-Afdal Ali and Al-Aziz Uthman. Then we reached the city of Alexandria, and we went many times to visit Sheikh al-Hafiz Abu at-Tahir Ahmad ibn Muhammad as-Salafi. We continued to go to him regularly, and we had the blessing of seeing in his face the light and joy of faith, and we listened to him for 3 days, Thursday, Friday and Saturday, the 4th of Ramadan. We made the most of the time, and those 3 days were among the best days of our lives. One of the interesting things that occurred during that visit was that on one of those days, Al-Malik al-Adil was next to his brother the Sultan. He leaned towards him and whispered something in his ear, and when Al-Hafid as-Salafi saw them, he rebuked them and expressed his displeasure towards them, so they started listening to him. As-Salafi the poet and his relationship with poets. Al-Hafid as-Salafi, may Allah have mercy on him, was a poet. He composed poetry and appreciated and critiqued it on a basis of knowledge and skill. He liked to listen to poets and singers, and he gave generously to those who praised him. He loved to listen to and quote poetry, and to hear poetry quoted in his gatherings, and he would repeat the lines that he liked to the people who were with him. Among the lines of poetry that he liked to quote were, "We show our fear of Allah at the time of every calamity. Then we forget Him when the calamity is over. How can we hope for an answer to our supplication when we block its route with our sins?" Some books have recorded for us his conversations with some of the poets. In these stories we can see the emotional impact of poetry and how it stirred in him feelings of longing and nostalgia for his people and his homeland of Isfahan. Abu Muhammad Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Tajibi al-Andalusi, who was known as Ibn al-Malih, said, Abul Hajjaj ibn al-Shaykh composed some lines of verse for Abu Tahir as-Salafi, in which he said, The only fault I have is that I am a stranger, and my people are kept away from me, and me from them. Abu Muhammad ibn al-Malih recorded, Abul Hajjaj said to me, when Sheikh Abu at-Tahir reached this line, he started to weep and cry, and he shouted at the top of his voice, My people are kept away from me and me from them, out of longing for his homeland Isfahan, and out of nostalgia for those relatives and brothers he had left behind, and he fell unconscious. His students started rebuking me and saying, What have you done to us today? The sheikh was taken into his house and he did not come out for 4 days. His death. On the morning of Friday, or it was said, on the night before, the 5th of Rabiul Thani, 576 Hijri, the life of as-Salafi came to an end in Alexandria, and his productive life that had lasted for a century ended, a life that he spent in acquiring knowledge, teaching, studying, writing, learning and benefiting others. He had never ceased for a single day, and nothing stopped him. He continued studying and teaching until the last evening of his life. The funeral prayer was offered for him by his friend Abu at-Tahir ibn Auf, the Maliki Faqih of Alexandria, on Friday afternoon in the mosque of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, and he was buried in the graveyard of Balah, which was described as follows by Ibn Khalikan. It is a graveyard within the walls by the Green Gate, where a number of the righteous, such as at-Tartushi and others, are buried. His grave was visited by famous historians, including Abu Shamah, author of Kitab al-Rawdatain fi Akhbar al-Dawlatain, who mentioned that among the events of 576 Hijri and said, In this year, al-Hafidh al-Salafi died, and I visited his grave inside the Green Gate. Al-Hafidh Abu at-Tahir al-Salafi was one of the great scholars. By virtue of his presence, Alexandria acquired global fame in the sciences of hadith and Quran recitation throughout the 6th century Hijri. The people of Alexandria should be proud of this great scholar and return his favor by teaching the new generation about his status and bringing his name back to memory by naming one of their institutions or schools after him, or publishing his legacy. End of part 2 of chapter 4.